but we don't know that it will be exactly 100. What we may find out is that we have maybe it'll be 90, maybe it'll be 110. We think it will be around 100, but as I already mentioned, until you have something in production, you're never 100% sure.
Hello and welcome to Crypto Interviews. My name is Claudio and this is Parachain, the channel that brings you crypto news, reviews, tutorials, and interviews with a focus on the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystems. And joining me today is a really important person. We've got Bill Laboon from the Web3 Foundation. He's going to talk to us a lot of the technical details about Web3 and also Polkadot and Kusama. I do have a number of questions for him also from the community. Hopefully we'll be able to get the answers and we'll be able to get more clarification on what's going to happen with the future of the Parachains. So Bill, welcome. And if you could please give us a bit of background about yourself for people who don't know who you are. How did you even get started into this technical world of the blockchain?
So thank you, Claudio, for having me. I am probably one of the few people who got involved in crypto because I was interested in hash functions.
Yeah.
Back in 2010, I was actually doing a hash algorithm analysis, and someone that I knew said, hey, there's a currency called Bitcoin that uses hashes a lot. So it took me another couple of years to really look into it, but I became very interested in how it worked. So at the time I was a software engineer, but I quickly moved on to teaching at the University of Pittsburgh in their computer science department, where I taught a lot of courses on software engineering, became more interested in blockchain, taught a course on blockchain. And as I became more interested, I started doing reviews for an academic journal on cryptocurrency and blockchain technology called Ledger. I decided I wanted to come in full time. So I saw that Web3 Foundation was looking for a technical educator, and I'd seen some of Gav's talks on what Polkadot could do, and I was very interested. And so that at the beginning of 2019, about 3 years ago, I started at Web3. And I've been here. I've been interacting with the community quite a bit. There are a lot of courses that I've put together. You may know me as the author of the Polkadot Digest. So every weekday, I give a quick summary of what's happening in the Polkadot ecosystem, which is quite a bit, actually. It's amazing to me how every day I have so much to write about, and I usually end up feel like I'm forgetting a couple of things by the end of it.
Yeah, and there's definitely not enough time during the day to complete all the work you'd like to complete, right? I mean, sometimes it feels like you'd want the day to be 48 hours long.
If not 96 hours, maybe. there's always more to do. There's always more to learn. There's always more to catch up on. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell us, how did you get started, like at the beginning with Kusama? Because when I first heard about Kusama back in early 2020, when a guy in my community first invested in it, and he said, look, have a look at the background. Gavin Wood has decided to build this product, which is a canary network. But at the time, we didn't have the same vision of Kusama, or at least that was the impression from the community, that the vision the action that we're seeing with Kusama at the moment with the Parachains and how it works as a canary network wasn't seen in the same way back then. It was seen as a testing ground. So how did that come up, and how come you decided to change that from that vision over to the canary networks?
Yeah, so I think this is really something that was very far-sighted that Gav came up with, because I'll be honest, when I first heard about Kusama, I was like, oh, okay, this is just another test net, right? We had Alexander at the time, and I said, well, what's the difference here, right? It took me a while to understand it because this concept didn't really exist, and what we've seen is that having this actual canary network, something with real economic value, has been really useful in helping us to find issues, right? And so what we have seen, we had a few restarts actually of Kusama in 2019. This is actually Chain Candidate 3, where Chain Candidates 1 and 2, we actually got the current state and migrated them on to a new chain. But as we started seeing more interesting things happen and seeing really a culture and community evolve along with Kusama, which I think is a bit different than Polkadot. I mean, they're related, but they're like cousins. You know, they're not twins, right? But they are related, but they're cousins. And so there always was this vision of this somewhere between a test net and a main net that Gab had. But I think what we have seen is really how valuable that is, right? So just off the top of my head, right, we have seen some issues with XCM that we have fixed with Kusama because people saw that there were ways to exploit it, and because they had economic incentive to exploit it, they tried, and we were able to solve the problem before it ever hit Polkadot. We've seen, like right now with the latest runtime upgrade, and a couple parachains are running slower with the 9160 upgrade, which we didn't see in testnets. So it's good that we were able to see it like in a real world environment before that gets moved to Polkadot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing with production. In production, it's always different because of the bandwidth, because of the number of users. You know how it is. It's always going to be, you're always going to get different results than with production, with the testnet. So,
yeah, exactly. And what we don't want is these problems to occur in Polkadot, right? With Kusama, we've always been very explicit, right? Expect chaos, no promises, but you get a lot of the benefits since of finding these problems in a sort of half production environment, and it's really helped us to avoid issues coming into into Polkadot, because we find them on Kusama first.
Yeah. So am I right in saying that if you wouldn't have had the idea of Kusama, you would have gone from Rokoku directly to Polkadot?
So probably West End to Polkadot.
West End
so
to
just
Polkadot.
So just to give a little background for the listeners, so there are several testnets out there. The two main ones are Rococo and West End. So Rococo is a testnet that is mostly used for testing parachains, and it can be reset. West End is a permanent testnet. So just like like the Bitcoin testnet, it just exists and continues on. We don't reset it. That's sort of the final testnet before things get rolled out to Kusama and to actual incentive economically valuable networks. So if you think of it, we have like our internal testnets at Parity and a couple of other places. Then we have Rococo, then West End, then to Kusama, and finally to Polkadot. So hopefully by the time a runtime has gone through all of those links, that we've ironed out most of the problems.
Right. So once a project has finished testing on West End, then they could say, okay, now we're ready to go with the auctions or for the crowd loan, and they would then become a para thread, right? As soon as they finish with that, they would actually deploy as a para thread on the live network on Kusama, say, or maybe on Polkadot if they don't plan to go to Kusama.
Correct. Most projects do follow this process, but something that I want to make clear is that because all of these are separate networks and because this is decentralized, there is nothing stopping the developers from going straight to Kusama if they like, or even straight to Polkadot. There's no one forcing them to build on Rococo first and then West End. We have some like recommendations, and that is what the vast majority of projects do. But it's never been like a rule or a law from Web3 Foundation or Parity. Oh, you must deploy here and then deploy here and then deploy here. And so you see this. Some projects aren't planning ever on deploying to Polkadot, and some have said they never want to deploy to Kusama. They're going to go straight from, and some have set up their own test nets. So there is like other Rococo-like testnet that has been set up by Centrifuge, I believe, called Cha-Cha-Cha. And so there's nothing. This is the normal process, but it's never. You're not forced into this. It's up to the individual projects to decide how they want to do it.
Right. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Now I do have a number more questions. One of them is, what's going to happen with when 100 parachains are going to be connected to Kusama and 100 to Polkadot? And by the way, is there a limit of 100 parachains on Kusama, just like there is on Polkadot, or how do they differ in that aspect?
Yeah, so a very good question. And my answer is going to be a little vague because some of the parameters we're still, we won't know until we hit them. So first off, the goal is in the current iteration of Polkadot and Kusama to have 100 parachains running directly on the relay chain. However, what we may see, and we have done estimates, we have done tests and benchmarks, and we think that this is more than achievable. But we don't know that it will be exactly 100. What we may find out is that we have maybe it'll be 90, maybe it'll be 110. We think it will be around 100, but as I already mentioned, until you have something in production, you're never 100% sure. So the idea for the current version of Polkadot and also Kusama is to get to this stable number of parachains and continue. Now this might mean if more chains want to get on the network, they may need to remain as parathreads, right? And connect to the network on a per block basis as opposed to reserving a slot.
Right.
So we kind of use parathread in two senses of the word, because right now when you register, if you're a potential parachain, you are technically a parathread. You are an entity that can connect to the network. But we also use parathread to mean a running chain that just like this, that doesn't stay connected as a parachain, but can rather connect on a per block basis to the relay chain. So that capability is coming relatively soon. It's being worked on. I don't have an exact date for you, but it's a technology that developers are working on right now. So the idea is once we get to 100 and you are Parachain project 101, you would connect, if you could not get a slot, then you would connect on a per block basis. So you would have a bid, just like, or rather similar to if you're sending a transaction in a crowded transaction pool, you have different bids of how much you want to pay in gas or a tip or whatever. And so this is how we can see this expanding outwards for the current version of Polkadot. Now, this is the medium term future though. So for the next, let's say 2 or 3 years. In the longer term future, our researchers are working on the concept of hierarchical relay chains. So what this means is that you have like the Polkadot relay chain, and you have other relay chains that act as
the secondary relay chains, right? Like a backup.
Exactly.
Right.
So we have like a relay chain, and then that as Parachains has other relay chains, and then those relay chains can have relay chains attached to them. So that gives us 3 orders of magnitude more parachains, end user parachains that can be connected. So then once we start getting into the tens of thousands of parachains possible, I think those limitations are going to be there won't be many right limitations, because there will just be anyone who wants to connect will be able to. You'll have many different blockchains, hopefully more space for the blockchains than even people can develop to be these parachains. So in the longer term, we have this idea that it should be essentially unlimited, or at least I mean, I hate to say that because we always find more space, more reasons for more memory, more hard drive space, more chain space. Yeah. But in the near future, yeah, the idea is once we start hitting those limits of number of parachains, we also have the concept of parathreads. And that's still, at least, another, probably, 2 years out before we even get to that point where we have approximately 100 parachains.
Yeah. And talking about that topic, I mean, with Kusama right now, we've seen there's a pause on the Parachain auctions because there aren't any more candidates. Am I right in saying that, or is it because it's just paused because of the last ones that have connected?
No, so that's that pause was actually built in. That has nothing to do with the number of candidates. In fact, there was at least one candidate in the last batch that they did not get a slot, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was.
I think it's Pichu from Kylie Network. Yeah, because they were there.
And there are others who are have been waiting for the next batch. So if you look at the auctions, basically on Kusama, they occur 5 weeks on and 1 week pause. 5 weeks on, 1 week pause. And the reason for this pause, when we originally proposed this, and it was passed by the dot holders, it was a referendum, was to make sure that a team would always know, they would always have at least 1 week notice before the lease period started, and they would have to connect. So what we didn't want is someone, maybe there was like a race between two and neither of them knows who is going to win, and then whoever has it would have to immediately try to connect after they find out who wins. So we have this 5 weeks on, 1 week off. But so there actually are quite a few other projects that are looking to go in for this next batch, which you'll probably see the crowd loans starting very soon, since the next batch starts this Sunday, the 20th. Oh. But there are more looking for this. And I do want to mention, by the way, that there is currently a post on Polkassembly. And if you read my Polkadot Digest, you'll see a link to it. I think I actually put it in yesterday, of how we should adjust the Polkadot and Kusama auction periods going forward. So there is a suggestion for that. Joe Petrowski from Web3 Foundation has just has proposed it in Polkassembly. Maybe we can add the links to your show notes or something, where we're looking, do people like this process? I know there have been some complaints about the slow pace of the Polkadot auctions compared to the Kusama auctions, for instance. Yeah. But this is always voted on by the community. Dot holders have the ability to change this. So if you are interested, please vote, and please provide suggestions in the Polkassembly post on how you think it should be run, or if you like the way that it's going now.
Right. So the community could actually submit a proposal to request the Parachain auctions on Polkadot to run for a week instead of 2 weeks, right? Like on Kusama.
Yes. Yeah. So this is, and in fact, you can look at the previous proposal and see how it's done. Or if you're trying to do it and you're having problems, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can show you how to do it. I will say though that because Polkadot is a slower, more conservative network, and that's sort of the philosophy and culture of Polkadot. There are good reasons why we're increasing the number of parachains more slowly on Polkadot than Kusama. Kusama, expect chaos. We expect that as the number of parachains continues, that we might start hitting into some issues. We haven't so far. Again, very minor things, like right now block production is a little bit more slow than it was with the previous runtime, but nothing major. But we can expect at some point some problems on Kusama as we increase the number of parachains. We're really trying to prevent that by going much more slowly on Polkadot. But again, this is a decentralized network. Dot holders can vote on this in governance. They can propose if you want to have honestly, if you wanted to have like one-day auctions and try to onboard 20 parachains at once, you can try to do that. I don't think it would pass democracy. I don't think people would vote in favor of it. But again, I think it's something important to keep in mind that the dot holders command the network.
And even if they have a dot staked, they should be able to do it, right?
Correct. Yes. So if you have dot staked, you can still use that for voting. The locks overlap. So if you have whatever 50 dot or 1,000 dot staked, and you plan on just keeping it staked, you also can vote depending on the conviction rate that you set for your voting. Then you can actually have it locked up only during the period of that vote. You don't even need to have it locked for longer than that. And since you have a
0.1x voting power, right? It's like 10% of your stack.
Correct. Yeah. So for 1x of your voting stack, you need to lock for 28 days after the close of the auction. But if you don't want to have that 28-day lock, then you can just have it locked for the period of the vote. But again, it's only worth 1/10 of the weight of someone who's willing to lock it afterwards.
Yeah, cool. And I just want to go back to the last point that you've mentioned with the secondary relay chains, because that's interesting. It's something that I wasn't really aware of. Now, what I want to know with that is how are you going to manage the not only the scalability but the speed of the block production? Because, like you were saying, we are seeing the parachains, especially on Kusama, be a bit slow when it comes to block production. So, how are you going? How do you see that being managed going forward? If you're going to have a secondary relay chain, do you think that's actually going to help speed up the block production?
So it depends, just like everything, it's complicated. It depends on what you mean by speed up. So really, when you're sharding, a chain, anytime you're sharding a chain, it's going to be easier to interact within that shard, right, than some others. So just like right now, if you're doing something on whatever Moonbeam or Moon River, and you're doing something, interacting with other smart contract on Moon River, that's going to be much faster than interacting like state mine to Moon River, like moving assets from one chain to another. Anytime you're crossing these shards, there's going to be a bit of a
Delay.
There's some additional time that you need. So the way to so obviously now, if we have like relay chains with relay chains with relay chains, and you are on over here, you need to hop to get over here. That's going to be much longer, right, than if you're just hopping on the same chain or even to another parachain on the same relay chain. So the way to mitigate that is to ensure that you are on that parachains are connected to shards and that they're try to interact with other chains that are connected to that same relay chain more often than ones that are farther apart. So we really have to start worrying then about the network topology. So currently, you don't worry about that much. If all the parachains are connected to the same relay chain, then right now, at least with horizontal relay message passing, communication is essentially the same from one to another. Time-wise, that's going to get, and it's more complicated already than something like Ethereum or some other single chain process. But that action will get more complicated first as we move to XCMP, when we have like a full interaction where it might be it might be quicker for chain A to interact with chain B than chain C, and it will get more complicated when we move to this multiple level of relay chain world. But that is a known challenge, and really the way to solve it then becomes either ensure that you're interacting in the same parachain as you are, or a parachain that is close, and then figuring out the best way to arrange the topology of these to ensure that parachains that are talking to each other often stay on the same relay chain, or like close by that relay chain.
Right. Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Now, I do want to ask about the secondary relay chains or tertiary or whatever number you'll have extra. Mm-hmm. Will those be individual projects, just like we've seen with Parachains, deciding to become a secondary relay chain, offering their support to Polkadot and Kusama, or will they be created by Parity themselves as part of Polkadot and Kusama?
So this hasn't entirely been decided yet, but what we see right now, so again, this is very far in the future. Our researchers are looking into the best ways to do it now. There's no code really at this point, or at least
it's just an idea. It's just an idea, yeah, concept.
Right. So this, I'm just speculating a bit, but I think what we're going to see is something similar to the way we have parachains now. So there are some common good parachains, for instance, State Mine and State Mint. We've been working for a while on Canvas, which is an Inc. smart contract common good parachain, which are developed by Parity. So we'll probably see relay chains like that. But just like we also see, obviously, parachains developed by third parties that win auction slots. We also see common good parachains are developed by others, but they're being put onto the network without winning an auction. I think we're going to see a mix, right? I can imagine some company having sort of a relay chain for sale that may have for sale for some specific niche, maybe like a DeFi based relay chain where you have all the DeFi stuff able to connect to it, or an NFT chain or whatever chains that all want to group together, because remember I said the topology becomes very important.
Yeah.
But you probably also will see like these common good relay chains that are just useful for expanding the number of possibilities of chains that connect, that Parity or others will develop.
Wow, interesting. So we're gonna have to see what decision is going to be taken in the near future. Cool,
Yeah.
Thank you.
If you want to stay up to date, research.web3.foundation, you can see what we're researching. That's all information, all things that are becoming farther along in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And now to expand back into the crowd loans. So is there a plan for, I don't know if Parity can control it, because at the end of the day, it's the community deciding, but how can you counteract possible scams that are deploying as Parathreads and then want to become Parachains, and they manage to actually win a slot because it doesn't require that many KSM anymore in the case of the Kusama crowd loans, now that we're seeing less activity in terms of the contributions? Is there any plan to counteract those from maybe tricking people into actually getting them to contribute? It's not really, I know you can't really say that you're losing, but at the end of the day, you are locking that Kusama for 11 months for a possible scam of a project, right? Which is trying to market themselves through this gateway of the crowd loans. How are you able to counteract against that? Is there anything that they can do over at Parity?
Well, so again, first off, we do have an anti-scam team led by Michaelis here at Web3 Foundation, not at Parity, who he does a lot of research and a lot of education to help people understand how they can find out about scams and tracking down scams. We work with Yako at Polkadot.js very closely to help avoid these. We do research into them as well, and try to avoid any, or let people understand how they can do their own research. We have a page on the wiki about it. So the question becomes, what about these parachain scams?
Yeah.
So the first thing, as you mentioned, like the downside is limited because you're only locking up your DOT or KSM, and they can be returned. The second thing is that actually referenda can occur to, I can't remember the name of it, the extrinsic off the top of my head, but essentially kick off that parachain and refund any DOT that were locked. So if a parachain has been determined to be a scam and users vote on that in a referendum, they actually can essentially kick it off the network, say it was a scam, and we get our DOT back. Perfect. So the thing is that we should think about like the economics of this from the scammer's perspective. Making a parachain, it's much easier than creating an entirely new blockchain, but it's not simple. So they would have to win a slot and get DOT for this. Make enough code that it can connect, right? And then the DOT that is given to them in the crowd loans, they don't receive it. It's just locked on their behalf. Yeah. So they would have to have some secondary way. Perhaps they're using this as a way of showing that they're real, and perhaps they could do some external way of getting funds in addition to this. But from Polkadot's perspective, we can protect that, right? But or at least the DOT holders can protect, or KSM holders, by returning their crowd loan funds. So there are some mechanisms that are in there. I think if you're doing this entirely on chain, entirely in the Polkadot world, and not with any sort of external purchases or anything like that, then you are well protected. But we always assume that you should be doing your own research as well. And again, right, we help you do that research. We help provide information. There's lots of information out there about the different parachains and how to research them. And I get a lot of questions. I try to answer as many as I can when people have questions about like hey, how does this work, or why are they doing it this way? Is there does this make sense? And I'll try to answer as best I can and answer as many people. But there is some responsibility on the end user, but we do provide a lot of ways to help avoid just actual loss of your DOT or KSM.
No, that's a good idea. And by the way, for the people that don't know how to actually go about submitting this kind of request, towards the parity technologies? How do you actually do it? Like, where do you have to go to submit this kind of request and then to get the voting for the community to support you to kick off that parachain from the off the relay chain, let's say, so that people can get their KSM or DOT refunded?
So if you go wiki.polkadot.network, there is a, if you do a search for governance, proposals, referenda, the basic idea is that you propose something, it eventually becomes, excuse me, a referendum, which all DOT holders or KSM holders can vote on. Again, off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact extrinsic that you would issue, but this extrinsic, it's basically like a function call in programming. So if the referendum is accepted by, by the network, then it automatically occurs. It's not as though you're, it's not like sending a message, right, and saying, hey, can you do this for me? It's like calling a function. It does that thing. It will kick them off. It'll deregister that parathread, and they won't be able to connect. So again, if you look at the wiki, I actually believe this happened once in the past, where people had trouble with the way that a parachain was acting, and they didn't want to crowdloan to it, and so there was a call to deregister their crowdloan. So it would be the same basic concept as for deregistering a parachain.
Yeah, we're well aware of that Parachain. We're not going to mention the name just to not cause any fraud, but yeah, I know which one you mean. Okay, I'm going to get into the technical questions now. These are from the community, but I actually got these questions from a developer in the community. So what's the reason to use scale codec in Substrate?
So I think that's for efficiency purposes over other mechanisms. I'm not familiar, honestly, with why the Substrate team decided on that particular codec and not something else. But compared to something like JSON, efficiency is very important, and so we needed something that could be really serialized easily. But I wasn't there, honestly, for the decisions behind that. And it's something I could look into, but I don't know off the top of my head. Okay,
no problem. Cool. Thank you. And now the final question that I've got is with regards to the upgrades. So there seems to be a problem when Polkadot does all these upgrades, and also Kusama, it does affect the parachains and also the dApps that are running on these parachains. So the question is there a plan to change that, and how will it be handled? And the reason this person is asking it is because it also affects the metadata, which requires updating, and also the applications, like I was saying. So for example, he's created this bot, and he's saying that it needs to make API calls to get balance and transfer. They're always the same. So they're asking, why do they have to upgrade that bot every time the API gets upgraded?
Yeah, good question. So the reason that even making the same calls, which may not have been updated, is that like the encoding has changes slightly, even if like the function calls are exactly the same. So it is a bit of a problem. We know it's a problem. We've seen it like with things, not just with apps, but also with things like Ledger, right? Where sometimes after a runtime, Ledger won't be able to connect because the API has changed slightly, the format of the data has changed slightly. So we know that's a problem. We try to avoid changing the API as much as possible. However, with the development, especially of Parachains, we've discovered that some changes need to be made. Like even though there was a good plan, we haven't deviated from the main parts of the protocol. Things do change. We expect that to change less and less often and in less and less severe ways as time goes on. And in fact, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but if you look at how much metadata changes there were, for instance, in the early days of Kusama, it was very rapid and would have major changes every month or two, and that's really slowed down. We then had a sort of period where there were a lot more runtime changes, especially in the summer and fall of last year. where because we had, started having real parachains running, we discovered a lot about the best way to have them work. And so there were some changes. We expect these changes to be less and less. Now we have the basic plan of how things work. Parachains. Again, there are some issues, which we've just discussed, like block production times a bit slower at this latest runtime. But we expect also that there are going to be fewer changes to that metadata going forward. It should not be something, at least on the relay chain, that happens all the time. But I think you're also going to see, with parachains, right, as they first start up, it's going to be the same thing, that they are going to have to change their metadata as well, because they're still figuring out the best way to operate their runtime. And I think anything, right, any piece of software, you're going to see a lot of changes, and then eventually it's sort of gets more static, right? The change, if you look at TCP/IP, right, things haven't really changed, or LaTeX, right? But in the early days, as people were discovering things, there were a lot of changes. So I think the ability to change the runtime in the metadata brings a lot of power, right, to building things. But especially in the early days, I think that that also has that drawback, right, of having to change and update frequently. But as things have become more solid, I think we're going to see less and less of that. Essentially, we've hit all of the major milestones in the original Polkadot paper. So again, until Polkadot 2.0, we're with the hierarchical relay chains or nested relay chains, then until we hit that point, we've really sort of figured out what to do. And so these changes should not be occurring nearly as much as they have in the past.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. So something to look forward to, that things are going to become more stable, and we're going to see less and less of these problems occurring. So it'll make life easier for those running dApps on these parachains, and also for those that are running the parachains themselves. Cool. Bill, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it. And by the way, if you want to follow Bill, I will post a link to his Twitter page down in the description below. And see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.